Alright guys, welcome back. It's been a little while since I've done a bait video, so I think we're going to do another one here. I always get a bunch of questions on my bait storage and some of the other videos that I made on how I store my bait for the winter and how I trap them. I figured I'd do an overview of how I trap the bait, how I kind of sort it, and how I also store it so it lasts me throughout the winter. So I'll give you guys some tips and tricks on how to do it, and maybe you guys can do a little bait trapping for yourself. It's kind of a fun thing to do, and it saves you a little bit of money and time during the ice fishing season. So I don't have anything set up right now. As you can see behind me, this is my bait tank setup. I've made like 3 different videos in the past on bait tank setups, and my most recent video was a handful of years ago. I had this down in my basement. The setup is exactly the same. There's maybe a few little changes, but for the most part everything's still the same. So I will leave that video down in the description below and also in the end cards, and it goes over how I built this bait tank and how the filter's set up and all that stuff in depth. I'll show you some of it in this video, but I don't want to go into all the detail of it because it's just, I already have videos on that. So I'm just going to kind of show you some tips and tricks on how to keep your bait alive. I'm going to set up my tank, we're going to go trap some bait and get this thing fired up for the season, because I just went ice fishing yesterday, so I got a bunch of bait I got to put in here soon. So this is not a glorified setup, it's pretty crude, and I know a lot of guys have mimicked this setup, and I've seen some of your videos and pictures, and they look way nicer than this. But for me, it's just a bait tank. I don't need it to look nice, it's out in my garage, it works every year, and I'm keeping it this way. But basically, all we're doing is, I have this chest freezer here. I don't remember the specifics of the chest freezer. People always ask me how big this is. I think it's like a 7.5 cubic foot or something like that. It probably says somewhere, but you can see the size. You can get whatever size you want. And the reason I got this chest cooler was initially because I had this in my basement and I wanted to keep the water cold inside of here. That does a couple things. It helps keep the water cleaner. Slows down the fish's kind of metabolism and everything, and they don't have as much waste, and it just keeps the water a lot cleaner. And also, you're not going to shock the bait. If you have it in warm water, bring it to the lake and you dunk it in the first time, the bait goes into shock, and a lot of times it'll just die instantly. So, it also helps keep the water nice and clean, and you get a lot of oxygen in there the way we have this set up. So the chest freezer is great. You can really use whatever, but I like the chest freezer because it actually keeps the water cold and you can regulate the temperature with how I have this set up. I just built this top. It's insulated. Once this thing gets down to temperature, it barely ever turns on. I'll show you the inside of this. It's actually kind of gross, but I should probably clean it out, but I'm not gonna. I might scrub it a little bit before we fill this up, but you can see I've siliconed all the edges years ago. I've been using this for, I don't know, 8 years or more. Every year, put bait in here. You gotta silicone all the edges just in case. The plug I siliconed, and then we built this foam top. Just a piece of foam board with plywood on it. And this right here is a pond pump. It's the same pump that I've had from day one, and it's still running. I'll link it down in the description below. 500 to 800 gallon per hour pond pump. And I have it set kind of in the middle, I guess, and it just circulates water up into my filter, which filters everything, comes back out through this tube and aerates, pushes the clean water out, aerates everything. And I also have a separate aerator here, just an aquarium aerator set up, hooked up right here. And we have this thermostat set up here that regulates the temperature of this, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. So first things first, I got to get this thing filled up with water. You can see this line here is usually where I fill it up, and then over the winter I'll add a little bit here and there. But what I like to do is, one thing I like to do is put a cage or something around your pump, so when fish die, they don't get sucked into the pump and burns it out. So that has really helped. It doesn't look very good, but it works. I've had it since day one. So let me go fill this thing up and we'll get the filter together. All right. So, since my hose doesn't reach out to the garage, we're doing it with the buckets. All right, so before I get this filled up too much, I've been using this little plant pot here to kind of set my pump up on so it's not sitting right down in the bottom, so fish get stuck underneath it. So I'll just slide that under there. This aerator can really go wherever. Put it there. And then I'm going to hook this filter up by just plugging into my little wonky getting it going. Plug it all together. I may put tape on some of these seams. So this line is coming from my pond pump. It's pumping into the bucket. It gets filtered. We'll show you that in a second. It goes through all the filter media, comes back out and shoots back into the tank. This is just an overflow. If this thing ever gets plugged up, it'll overflow back into the tank. Last bucket here. Whoop. All right. One thing you kind of got to pay attention to, I'm on a well, so my water is pretty good. All my water that I just put in here comes through a softener and a filter system anyway, so it's all pretty well treated. And I've never had problems with the fish, dying instantly putting them in here or anything like that. So if you're on town water, you're gonna have probably chlorine in your water. That's one things you want to watch out for. You don't have to really treat it with anything. You can just either let the bucket sit out or, fill your tank up and just let it run for a day or so. Just giving that water the aeration and stuff, that chlorine will naturally dissipate and you should be all set. But you don't want to fill your tank up and throw your fish right in there if it has chlorine. They will not like that. I got this nice aerator here. I actually really like this. I used it all last season. It's heavy and it's got square edges on it. I'll link it down in the description. But it's like a big bar and I can just set it wherever I want. I try to put it way down in the bottom so the bubbles come up. But this filter alone aerates it really well. I just wanted some extra aeration in there, so that's what that does. Now let's get this filter set up. So I've been wanting to upgrade this to something completely different the last couple years, but by the time fall gets here and first ice is here, I just don't get around to it. So I have plans to upgrade this. I don't want to spoil them yet. I might try to do it in the next couple years here. It's not going to happen this season, I don't think, but I want to upgrade this filter to something a little bit better because it's not foolproof. I mean, you do have to pay attention and stay on top of things, just like owning a fish tank. And this filter here, everything that I built it with, you can get at your local hardware store. So it's not like anything too crazy. So, and this is where I'm not sure if any of this stuff really matters, but couple other people I had talked to that built these or seen videos years ago started with these little dollar store scrubbies. I got a whole bunch of them in here, and if you go watch the original video, you'll see I got a lot of them in here. And I guess the theory behind that is it acts as sort of a biofilter, and all the good bacteria and stuff will attach to that. It's a lot of surface area, and it'll help filter out your water. I don't really know if that's a thing when you have almost freezing cold water. I don't know if that's really working the way that a normal fish tank would. It probably isn't, but it can't hurt to have it in there. If you buy one of the big canister filters for a fish tank, you either have lava rock or bio balls or something. It's the same theory, I guess, but again, I don't know if that really matters all that much. So, but it's in there. And then on top of that, we have a series of filters. This is one from last year. I'm probably going to reuse it because I don't have another one to replace it right at the moment. It looks pretty nasty, but it'll work. This is actually just a floor buffing pad. I got it at a local hardware store, and this is like an HVAC filter. So you can see you can make this out of anything, but what you want to look for is something with a fine, something that's more of a fine filter and something that's more of a coarse filter, so you can almost see through this. And then you want to layer them, the finest filter on the bottom, medium and coarse. So when the water goes through, you're catching all the bigger stuff first, the medium-sized stuff second, and then the fine filters on the bottom. This is kind of what I use for my fine filter. It's just, you get it from a sewing store to make pads and pillows and stuff. And you can either cut it round or you can ball it up and stick it in there. It doesn't matter. I'll probably cut a piece out of here and just make it work for this year. And so if you're confused on how this works, this pipe goes inside of here and it pulls water off the bottom of the bucket from the bottom. So all the water gets sprayed in the top, goes down the bottom, pulls it up and out. So it's going through all of your filter and then out this tube. So what I do is I put the coarse filter on top, like that. I put my medium filter in, and then I gotta cut this piece. I'm probably gonna have to go to the store later and buy an actual piece, but because I didn't have enough, but you would cut this and slip that on next. But if you cut them a little bit big, they'll fit nice and tight in the bucket and you won't get air around there, or water around there. Kind of piece that together for now. You'll stick all of this stuff down in your filter and then plug that pipe right in. Make sure there's nothing plugging the bottom of that pipe. You get around those little scrubbies there. Kind of pull this stuff, make it all nice and neat. I gotta do it with two hands here, hold on. What I like to do is put one more coarse filter like this on top to catch all the, you know, the first really nasty stuff that comes out of here. So here's my spray bar, and I've just drilled a bunch of holes in there. That's gonna plug in here. I'm just gonna put this on top, so that looks like that. And now we should be ready to plug this thing in and see how it's gonna run. But I've got this all hooked up and plugged in. All I gotta do is flip this switch. So let's see. Looks like it's working. That's spraying nice. And once the bucket fills up to here, it'll start dumping water out into our tank. You can see the aerator's bubbling already. There's a bunch of crap floating around here, but that'll get filtered out. And like I said, I'll take this top filter off and go clean that out probably later today. You can see already there's some debris in there that this filter's catching. Another thing I've done in the past, and I don't know if this makes a bit of difference really, but I've used this Better Bait formula here, and I just sprinkle some in there in the beginning to kind of treat the water. I don't know if it works all good. It says it conditions water, removes chlorine, so those of you who have chlorine in your water, and it's just supposed to help the bait with their, you know, slime coat and whatever to prevent disease and die off. So it can't hurt. I always put a little bit in there. It turns your water blue, so dump some in there. A lot of local bait shops actually use this stuff. You go and get your bait and the water's blue. This is what they're putting in there. Another thing you can do to kind of help your water is add either carbon or Zolite tablets or packets to your filter so the water sprays over those, and that really helps kind of scrub out, clean out the water. A lot of times after you've had the bait in here a while, the water might start getting murky on you, or you'll see a lot of like scummy bubbles on the top, and that's a sign that you're either gonna have to do a 50% water change, or you're gonna have to do something to treat the water a little bit. And a lot of times what I can do is you can go to your local pet shop, or you can buy the big containers of it. I usually like to buy the big containers so I can put more in, but you can get these carbon Zolite little bags like this. I'll link them down in the description below. I usually like the little bit bigger ones because it works better, but the first time that water gets murky, you drop one or two of these in your filter here, let the water spray over it, and it cleans it right up. So that buys you a little bit of time. If you keep getting that, you're probably overloading your system. You are overloading your system. You probably have too much bait in there, and you're gonna have to do water changes. Now, a lot of people ask me, do you ever change the water? Do you feed the fish? All these questions. I change the water if it gets bad enough. If I start getting a few that are dying off, I'll do like a 50% water change. So I'll just take a bunch of 5-gallon buckets, you know, dump them outside, and then dump in fresh water, and usually put in one of those carbon Zolite packets or something, and just kind of treat the water and let it go, and we're good for quite a while. It just depends how much bait you have in there. If you're using shiners, they're pretty hardy, they last a long time. But if you're keeping smelts in here, you're gonna have to really pay attention because they're pretty finicky. You're probably gonna have to change the water a bunch, and it's just gonna be a process. But I sometimes do put smelts in here. I don't mix them with the shiners because they tend to die off pretty easy. So what I do is I either make or use something like this, where I can just keep a dozen smelts in there, and just put like a pool noodle or something on there. You stick it in your tank and it'll float. I do this. I have it hooked right to the wall so it doesn't float off on me and get sunk by the filter, but it sits right there, and you can put your smelts in there, and they're separate from the shiners. Obviously you can make a bigger one. You can make a full divider in here if you wanted to keep, you know, bigger fish with smaller fish or whatnot, but I usually just mix them in. I don't have a ton of fish in here usually. I have like maybe 10-12 dozen, and at most, because I don't want to overload this. If I need more bait, I can go trap it really easily at a local pond, anywhere from just a couple dozen up to maybe 10 dozen. But obviously if you have a bigger tank, or if you're really into, you know, taking care of this, you can put a bunch of fish in here if you're going to use them. So let's talk about the temperature real quick. This is my Inkbird thermometer. I don't know if the camera's actually going to pick that up because it's LED, but this allows you, it's a thermostat, and this allows you to regulate the temperature inside of this. People always ask me what temperature. I usually set mine to 45 degrees. So this thing is plugged, the freezer is plugged directly into the Inkbird, and the Inkbird has a thermometer down in the tank. So if that temperature goes above 45 degrees, it'll kick on the freezer and it'll keep it right at 45 degrees. I've never had an issue with it going colder. This garage is insulated. It's not heated. A lot of people have asked, should I be feeding the bait? And I don't. And the reason for that is the water quality. It's going to suffer dramatically if you start putting food in there. They're eating it and having waste, or the food doesn't get eaten. It's going to go through your filter. It's going to jam up everything, cause a lot of problems. So the best thing to do is, when you get your bait, is to put them in a bucket, let them sit for a couple days, put them in multiple buckets, whatever, if you have a lot. Let them get all that waste out of their system, and then put them in here so they're not pooping and getting all kinds of stuff in your tank and causing bacteria and all kinds of problems. So anyway, that's kind of the bait tank setup. We'll talk about it a little bit more when I get back, but let's go out to the pond. Let's go throw a trap in, see if we can get some shiners for this tank, and we'll come right back. I'll show you how we kind of sort them, put them in here, and do all that stuff. So let's go check it out. Well, you can see I'm out here on the bait pond right now. This is actually my family's pond right here. What I like to do is I get an auger. I usually bring my hand auger so I don't have to worry about gas or batteries. I drill 4 holes big enough to put our trap down in. So let me go ahead and do that for you. This is the nicest brand auger. I'll link it down in the description below. It works pretty good. I've been happy with it. Had it for a couple of years now. And then I take my chisel. I'll link all the stuff down in the description below for you guys. Take my chisel and just chip out the edges, make a square. Yeah, that's how much ice we got. All right, so you see I can got my hole here. And these are what I use for traps. These are the G's minnow traps. You can get them right from Walmart. Amazon has them. I'll link them down below. And I just use it to scoop out all the ice. You can see I make the hole big enough for this to go down through. I usually use some sort of stick to go across the hole to suspend this, and I'll show you here. All right, so now I'm going to show you guys how I set my trap here. So what I usually bait these traps with is really whatever I have for either dog or cat food. You can use bread, but we have cats, so I build these little mesh cages out of hardware cloth, and I just stuff it full of cat food, and I throw it right in the trap itself. And what that does is, instead of just dumping the bait in the trap, when you do that, it'll float up to the top, and the fish will just pick at the bait from the outside of the trap. If you put it in some sort of little cage like this, they will have to go in the trap to get it. So the bait lasts longer, and you just have more success that way. So these are pretty easy to use. I've had these for years, these old G's minnow traps. And then I just drop it down in. Now this pond, although it's pretty small, it's still probably 12 feet deep. And so I'm gonna go down about 6 feet. I'll go like halfway, and I'll just suspend that just like that over the hole. If I come back in a couple days, I may have to chip that out, but we'll come back in a few hours and see what we got. All right, well, I've come back. It's a few hours later. I usually let these sit for at least a day or two. You have to check your local regulations on what they allow for, you know, how many days you have to check these. Well, looks like we got some fish. Oh yeah, we got a bunch of shiners in there. I'm gonna dump this out just for a couple hours. That's pretty good. If you guys are looking for places to trap yourself, you can, using Google Earth, Google Maps is a really good resource. Little farm ponds, little home ponds like this that people have, drainage areas. But the biggest thing is you gotta know who owns the property and make sure you have permission. But what I usually like to do is, if there's no ice, I take the trap with a long thing of line, and I throw it out there towards the deepest part of the pond, let it sit down on the bottom. Now you'll get a lot of like mud puppies, pollywog type things in there. So to kind of eliminate that, I like to do it when I have some ice, and I just suspend the trap up about halfway in the water column. So we're probably 6 feet down here, and that mostly just gets me shiners and dace that are in this pond. We got quite a bit of bait in there. Depending on the opening size of your trap will depend on what size bait you get. So if you want bigger bait, either cut that open or just kind of bend it open a little bit more, and you'll get bigger bait. I got some bigger ones in here this time because my last pull I noticed I got some smaller fish, so I opened up that size, and now I got some couple like 4-inch shiners in there. So let's go home and get these guys in the tank. All right, so we're back home. I got a lot of bait to deal with and go through right now. They've been sitting in this bait bucket for almost 2 days, and that's about the time that I usually leave them in there. The water starts getting kind of cruddy looking after that. They've kind of gotten a lot of stuff through their digestive system, so they're not going to get it into our bait tank over here. So now I can kind of go through and sort these things. There's a few different ways to do it. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you want to actually sort these out by size or whatever, like if you have different dividers, you can actually buy minnow graders like this here, and dump them into this, and a certain size minnow will come out through this side, and so you'll have all, one size of minnow. But I use this for smelting so we can get, bigger smelts. But for what I'm doing here with shiners, I'm just looking for shiners, that's it. I don't want anything real small. Smallish, medium-sized shiners and up. So I'm gonna go through, which maybe around like 2 inches or so and bigger. I have a lot of dace in here that I'm gonna sort through. I'll probably keep some of the bigger ones, but any fish that don't look like they're doing too good, like they're kind of rolling on the surface, or they have maybe an injured spot on them or some type of weird growth, I would not put that in your bait tank, because chances are they're not going to make it, and they may infect another fish with whatever disease they might have. That's a nice medium-sized shiner there, I would say. That's a good size for trout and salmon, although a lot of times when I go trout fishing, I'll use even smaller ones. I'll use something. So I don't really care, about sorting these all out and have them all organized. I just want to get the shiners in there and the dace not in there. What I did last year, and what I'll probably do this year also, is kind of sort through these fish, and the ones that are real small, I took a clothes basket with a pool noodle around it, one of those fold-out clothes baskets, and chipped a big hole in the pond, set it in there, and then I could put all my smaller bait back in that basket throughout the winter, and I wouldn't keep retrapping them. And then in the summer, or in the spring when the ice melts, that basket will be still floating there holding the minnows, and then you can dump them all back into the pond, and those minnows will grow to be bigger and reproduce, and that way you won't trap out your pond completely. It's always good to leave some of the bigger fish though. You don't want to completely trap out every fish because you'll end up not having bait for years and years. You want to just be careful. All right, so I just dumped my bait in there. I guess I didn't have the camera on, but not that it really matters. I got probably 4 or 5 dozen in there. They seem to be pretty happy, so as long as they're kind of, you know, all throughout the tank, they're not all hanging around right on the surface, nose up, that means that they're kind of running out of oxygen or that the water quality is suffering. So seem to be doing pretty good. I'm going to keep an eye on them the next couple days, and then they should be good to go for quite a while. So I'm sure I missed a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, there is another setup video on this whole setup, although I went over quite a bit of it with you here. If there's something in this video that you didn't see, if you have a question, leave it down in the comments below and I will try to answer it. Or if you want to see another video like this, some bait trapping videos or anything else like that, leave it down in the comments, because I like to kind of switch it up and do some different type of videos that you guys want to see. So thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you guys in the next video.